Today, I'm going to be randomly talking about games from my childhood, and we'll see how that goes. First game I'm going to talk about needs a little explanation. I didn't always have a PC growing up. I had two Amstrad machines, and Amstrad were a company formed by Alan Sugar, I believe, in the UK, to compete with the likes of Clive Sinclair and his Spectrum machines and the BBC Micro and so on in the 80s. And one day my dad brought home this Amstrad machine, and it was like this wondrous device that I'd never seen, and it had what was called a tape drive. And tape drives are literally tape drives. You stuck tapes in them, it read off like the cassette tape like thing and loaded games from it. And the only game that I remember from that period, this was like the 80s, was it was called Robin Hood. And hopefully I'll be able to find footage of it, and I'll stick it up there. But it was this sort of platformy game where you played Robin Hood and you had to rescue Maid Marian or something. But the one thing I remember the most from it is the tape drive trying to load it. It took absolutely forever. We realised shortly afterwards, it was like, yeah, you'd have to wait 10 to 15 minutes, maybe longer, might have been 30, I don't know, for the game to actually load, never mind play it. And we realised soon after that this was stupid, there was no point to this. The old Amstrad was soon replaced with a new Amstrad, and it had disk drive and also cartridge support. And one of the games I distinctly remember playing was called the Terminator, and it was a series of different mini games from various genres. You had like this fighting game where you'd fight in front of a vending machine against a Terminator. You'd have this driving game where you avoid like pools of oil or whatever. And I'm sure there was more, but I was too young and not good enough at the game to get much further. So it was okay, but it was fun to sort of see the nice sort of graphical palette, because prior to that we hadn't experienced that kind of thing. Then came Burning Rubber, which was included on the cartridge that came with the machine. And Burning Rubber was a racing game, and oh boy was it a racing game. Like wonderful music, amazing sound effects, beautiful graphics, and it had this day-night cycle. So as you were driving along doing all these laps, the sky would slowly change colour and it would turn to night, and you'd constantly be up against the clock. It was a desperate attempt to get to the next, rallying point before time ran out. And it was an excellent game, and I played it recently on an emulator and it still is a good game. Burning Rubber. Then everything changed in the early 90s. We got Packard Bell multimedia PC, and it must have cost my dad thousands of pounds at the time. And I remember driving down and getting it, and it was like this momentous event, and it was, because it introduced us to like proper IBM compatible PC gaming. It was something else, it really was. There was this game called Jurassic Park, and I had seen the movie and it had left a big impression on me as a child, because at the time I wanted to be a paleontologist, and suddenly seeing this like blockbuster movie with these like lifelike dinosaurs just blew me away. And Jurassic Park the game was okay, it was limited. You had this like third person top down kind of shooter element where you would go from bunker to bunker and take out dinosaurs and stuff. And then there was also this sort of proto first-person shooter kind of thing going on as well, and I wasn't so keen on that. I honestly, I didn't get very far in the game because of my age, but it left a big impression with me, even if it's probably not that great a game. Sometimes you have games in your childhood that leave fond memories, but, if you were to go back and revisit them, they're not all going to be like Burning Rubber. Some of them just don't hold up at all. The next game I'm going to talk about is a favourite of mine, always has been, always will be, and that's Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. It came with the machine alongside Jurassic Park, and it's just this glorious point-and-click adventure game. It was our first introduction to the LucasArts style of that genre, and we had seen the Indiana Jones movies, and they really, really struck a chord with us. So seeing what was essentially the fourth, at the time, Indiana Jones movie played out in front of our eyes in this sort of puzzling environment with tremendous score and glorious locales was something else entirely. And it still is one of the best games ever made. Dinosaur Safari was very different to the aforementioned Jurassic Park because it was a Windows game, and it was one of the first Windows games that I recall playing. Previously I'd played games on DOS, but it introduced this idea of being able to play games that weren't Minesweeper in this like Windows environment, and that was shocking to me. And you'd go around and you'd get points for taking pictures of dinosaurs, and there'd be this animation of a dinosaur, and you'd have to capture the right moment to get the highest score or most money or something. It was very engaging and very involving. Lord of the Rings, or J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings Volume 1, as I think it's known as, was a top-down Ultima-style role-playing game, but in the world of Middle-earth. And it came with our machine as well, in the enhanced CD version. And I was an enormous fan of Tolkien at the time. What people don't understand is that it was the second ever proper graphical depiction of Middle-earth. And just to be able to immerse yourself in the world, in like this open world environment, in an RPG, but with the whole Tolkien story going on, was just incredible. Just amazing to me as a child. I would just live in that game, I really would. And the most surprising thing about it was that the story wasn't necessarily true to the book. Like, there were bits and pieces far off a trodden path that had nothing to do with anything written in The Lord of the Rings, and they were well done as well. I remember going to my dad's office back in the day, and he would have his work machine out, and to babysit me, he would sit me in front of the work computer and let me play this shareware platformer game. And I recently found out what it was through my random DOS game show. It's a game called Space Chase, where you play as the intrepid hero Jason Storm, and I would sit at the computer and I would shoot these little sort of hopping fuzzy guys that glowed, and I'd have all kinds of fun. I was never any good at it, but it was a distinctly average platformer, but it was the only one on his machine at the time, so I didn't realise it was distinctly average. I just enjoyed it for what it was, and many a happy hour was spent doing that. The first encounter I ever had with a Doom engine game was not Doom. It was a Raven Software game by the name of Heretic, and I installed the shareware version on my computer and was completely blown away. The fantasy setting appealed to me, as I was a big fan of fantasy at the time. The real-time lighting effects just scared me so much. It was really eye-opening, and I still play Doom engine games to this day. King's Quest VI was another that came with our original Packard Bell IBM compatible, and the more I think about that collection of games, the more I realise that somebody involved in that company knew what they were doing when it came to bundling games. There were so many great games, and this is just another one of them. But unlike Indiana Jones, which was quite forgiving and based in the real world, King's Quest took place on this fantastical island, had all kinds of traps and perils that you could die from quite easily as Prince Alexander searching for Cassima, I think her name was, and it was really, really colourful, and it took advantage of that sort of VGA ability of the new computer, and the vibrant colours and the wonderful sound and the fully voiced actors. I mean, that was incredible to us. Unbelievable. And then there's Dune. I will go to bat for Dune every single time. I am like a one-man Dune promotion machine. Dune is an adventure game in real time with a real-time strategy overworld element as well. And it's based off a brilliant science fiction novel. Check it out if you haven't already. Frank Herbert is an amazing writer. And you play as Paul Atreides, and your goal is to rally the Fremen against your evil Harkonnen opponents and uncover what's going on in the spice trading industry. And it just snowballs from there. Fully voiced characters, day-night cycles. It was just stunning. It was absolutely stunning. And it really sort of left a permanent impact upon us. But I've talked about Dune plenty on this channel. Speaking about talking about things plenty on this channel,
TIE Fighter.
TIE Fighter is one of the best games of all time. I don't mean one of the best DOS games or one of the best games I remember back in the day. I mean one of the best games ever. And the reason for that is its campaign. It has one of the greatest campaigns. Like, there's 13 battles, probably 8 missions each battle roughly, whole pile of training campaigns, and the entire thing has you play as the bad guy for the Emperor. And you realise that the rank and file of the Empire are mostly focused on keeping order and keeping peace within the galaxy. They're not really, interested in the dark side of the Force or anything like that. And you fly along as a pilot in various space fighters, and you sort out issues and problems within the galaxy. And it's told brilliantly. The narrative is woven through the Star Wars movies. And the voice acting and the music is just stunning as well. Might and Magic 2. I got this a little later, and one of the great things about Might and Magic 2 was that I could copy it to a floppy disk drive. We had 2 machines back then, and one of them old hat IBM compatible Packard Bell, and the other was this brand spanking new shiny Pentium machine. And often my brothers would fight amongst ourselves as to who got to play on the new machine. And eventually I realised, hey, I could just take this floppy disk, stick Might and Magic 2 on it, and go play on the old machine. Because the old machine could handle Might and Magic 2 fine. It's a tile-based blobber, and it does the job very well. I mean, the graphics aren't spectacular, the sound is limited to PC speaker, but if you want a tile-based dungeon-crawling blobber with an overworld, then Might and Magic 2 is quite fun. I reached a point where I just kept leveling and leveling and leveling after school until the game basically said to me, yeah, there's no more combat for you. All the monsters will run away from you. Your level's too high. They will simply flee if you get into a fight with them. And that's when I realised, hey, maybe I should have done the real plot. Maybe I should have followed the story instead of just randomly going around killing things. And last but not least, there's Warcraft. Warcraft was my proper introduction to what constitutes the real-time strategy genre. Previously I'd sort of played a bit of it in Dune, but that was almost like a prototype. Warcraft is a fantasy clone of Dune 2. Obviously now it's an entirely different beast in hindsight, because we know about Blizzard Entertainment and what happened with them. But at the time, it was just this up-and-coming company that had made this neat strategy game. And I would sit and I would play the shareware demo of that, playing as either the orcs or the humans, building up my little base and winning the various levels. But unfortunately, at the end of the demo, there was a final level for either faction where you would just be surrounded by this horde. no pun intended, and the game would basically say to you, hey, buy the real version and we'll not sort of do that to you next time. But it was really fun and really entertaining, and I must have played hundreds of hours of those first few levels. And I always remember I was always on the lookout for the full boxed copy of it, but by the time I had enough money that I could actually afford it, I could never find it. Old companies, they used to release these like jewel case CDs, and it would be the demo of the game, but they'd advertise it so it looked like the full version. And I remember buying one and being massively disappointed at the time. An all-time classic of the genre, which has sadly aged and desperately needs a remaster. Just not by the same team that did Warcraft 3, okay? And I guess that's it. If you find this interesting, then feel free to let me know. I might do more. You never know. See you soon.